Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle. Thank you for joining us for the International Criminal Law Committee webinar, Cautionary Tales, the Prosecutor versus Rodrigo Roa Duterte. Our program today will be 75 minutes. I am joined by three distinguished speakers. Gilbert T. Andres is is admitted to practice law before the Philippine Bar and before the International Criminal Court, the ICC. He is a member of the Asian Academy of International Law and corporate secretary of the Philippine Society of International Law, PSIL. Chantel Daniels is the International Corporation Advisor, Officer of the Prosecutor, International Criminal Court. Chantel will be joining us by video recording. She has been working with the International Corporation Advisor for the Office of Prosecutor of the ICC since 2014. We are also joined by David Borden, founder and executive director of StopTheDrugWar.org. David played the leading role in pioneering use of the internet for education and organizing in drug policy reform after founding Stop the Drug War, known as DRCNet, short for Drug Reform Coordination Network, in the late 1993. Our session will start with a presentation from Gilbert and then proceed to a video recording by Chantel. And David will conclude the webinar with the last presentation. The speakers will be focusing on the case of the former president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte's 3 counts of crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court. The panel will examine how the situation in the Philippines evolved during the policy against the war on drugs, what lessons the case provides to governments, and how the rule of law may be effectively applied in these situations. Throughout this program, if you have questions that come up, you are welcome to ask them using the question and answer function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will get to the questions at the end of the program. Again, thank everyone for joining. Gilbert, you may begin.
Thank you, Danielle, for the kind introduction and greetings to all of us. Now, I'm going to give the socio-political context of the rise of Mr. Duterte as President of the Philippines. And I will make this a very conversational topic. And I will also give you a overall theme that I will relate with the subject of this topic. The overall theme of my talk really is the erosion of respect for the rule of law, for human rights, and the erosion of domestic accountability mechanisms in the Philippines with respect to the war on drugs. And I will make this topic alive through my experience also as the executive director of the Center for International Law and or Center Law Philippines. Center Law Philippines actually represented the victims of the war on drugs since 2016 until now. Now, let me start with the rise of Mr. Duterte. Mr. Duterte actually was a longtime mayor of Davao City, which is at one point the largest city in the world in terms of land area. And he actually was a vice mayor during the time of then President Cory Aquino after EDSA People Power in February 1986. Hence, we can call Mr. Duterte as the legacy of the People Power. And during his mayorship, he actually implemented a no-holds-barred policy of extrajudicial killings against petty criminals in order to allegedly improve the peace and order situation in Davao City. And with this decades-long mayorship of Davao City, it became one of the major cities in the Philippines. And he used this as a platform in order to campaign during the 2016 presidential elections. He actually campaigned explicitly on a policy of extrajudicial killings against criminals in order to have peace and order in the Philippines. And based on that very explicit EJK policy, he actually won. Not really the majority, but the plurality of votes in the 2016 elections. And true enough, when he actually took office as President of the Philippines on June 30, 2016, the very next day, on July 1, 2016, the Philippine National Police Chief, Bato de la Rosa, issued Command Memorandum Circular 16-2016. Now, this CMC 16-2016 is very pivotal in the Philippine War on Drugs because it became the documentary basis for all of the extrajudicial killings that happened during the presidency of Mr. Duterte. And this CMC 16-2016 is called Oplan Double Barrel. Why double barrel? Because it has two nodes. The first node is targeting high value targets, the so-called drug lords. And the second is really a slang, a contraction of two words, which essentially means knock and then apprehend. So tokhang. And this is really targeted towards low-income communities who are allegedly selling illegal drugs. Now, under this Oplan Double Barrel or CMC 16-2016, during the effective time period of the ICC Rome Statute for the Philippines, that's the ICC Rome Statute became effective for the Philippines from November 1, 2011 until March 16, 2019. During that short time period, the Philippine National Police admitted killing at least 6,000 persons under Oplan Double Barrel. And in fact, the Central Law Philippines actually represented one of the Tokhang survivors who actually survived an operation last August 21, 2016, wherein 4 of his friends were actually murdered under Oplan Tokhang. And the Central Law Philippines actually represented him as defendant in a criminal charge for direct assault against persons in authority. And while we were actually handling his defense, we actually thought of invoking the petition for writ of amparo, the amparo rules of the Philippines, which the Philippines actually adopted from Latin America. And on January 2017, the Tokhang survivor, as well as the family members of those who were murdered in the Operation Tokhang, we filed a petition for the writ of amparo before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court actually issued a temporary protection order against the police officers who committed the murder and frustrated murder. And then we also appeared before the Court of Appeals in order to receive evidence as to show that there's really a threat to the life, liberty, and security of this Tokhang survivor, as well as the family members of his friends who were murdered. And fortunately, the Office of the Solicitor General, who represented the police officers as well as the Philippine National Police, actually did not anymore controvert the evidence that we attached to the petition for amparo. Hence, the Court of Appeals already issued the privilege of the writ of amparo and made that temporary protection order permanent. And this is significant because the permanent protection order actually stipulates that these police officers who perpetrated the Tokhang operation cannot enter the 1 kilometer radius around the house, the residence, as well as the workplace of the Tokhang survivor, and his friends. Hence, this is actually the first privilege of the writ of amparo that was issued with respect to the war on drugs. Now, therefore, because of that, our clients actually had hope that judicial remedies may actually be working. Hence, we filed a frustrated murder and multiple murder criminal complaint before the Office of the Ombudsman last March 2017 against the police officers, four police officers who committed the Oplan Tokhang against his friends. And unfortunately, last year 2023, the ombudsman actually dismissed the criminal complaints. So we filed a motion for reconsideration, and last 2024, the Office of the Ombudsman unfortunately dismissed also our motion for reconsideration. Hence, this is an example wherein the domestic accountability mechanism of the Philippines did not work actually for victims of the war on drugs. And it's important to note that this frustrated murder and murder charges were only filed against the direct perpetrators of the EJ case. It's only filed against low-level police officers and not yet the hierarchy, such as the PNP chief, or even against the president. Hence, this is an example wherein the domestic accountability mechanism of the Philippines did not actually work out for the victims of the war on drugs. I'd also like to add that upon the assumption of Mr. Rodrigo Duterte as president, there was also a very systematic narrative of actually eroding the humanity of so-called drug suspects so as to justify the policy of extrajudicial killings against these alleged drug suspects. And the war on drugs was really perpetrated against low-income communities. Hence, we actually call this not really the war on drugs, but really the war against the poor. Just to give you an idea of these low-income communities, a table that you have during your breakfast, the size of an average house in these low-income communities. Hence, Center Law actually filed a community writ of amparo against the Philippine National Police last September of 2017. And this petition was actually consolidated with another petition that actually challenged the constitutionality of the war on drugs. Because in the Philippines, we actually adopted the American legal concept of judicial review. Therefore, Center Law actually argued before the Philippine Supreme Court that CMC 16-2016 or Oplan Double Barrel and the war on drugs itself is unconstitutional for violating the right to life and liberty of its victims. But unfortunately, we filed it last September 2017. We argued before the Philippine Supreme Court from October to November until December. Unfortunately, that case is still pending before the Philippine Supreme Court. Hence, this is another example wherein a supposed domestic remedy such as judicial review before the Philippine Supreme Court unfortunately did not pan out for the victims of the war on drugs. Now, let me go back a bit to the ombudsman who actually dismissed the frustrated murder and multiple murder charges that Center Law filed for a Tokhang survivor, the relatives of the four murdered friends. We actually filed a petition for certiorari before the Philippine Supreme Court last 2024, which assailed the dismissals by the Office of the Ombudsman as being imbued with grave abuse of discretion. And unfortunately, the Philippine Supreme Court issued a minute resolution, a one-page resolution 14 days ago, which actually dismissed our petition for certiorari. Hence, it's so apt that I'm discussing this topic because tomorrow, Friday, Philippine time, Center Law, on behalf of the four petitioners, including the Tokhang survivor, we will actually file a motion for reconsideration, pleading before the Supreme Court of the Philippines to reconsider its dismissal of the petition and to actually overturn the decision of the Ombudsman, which dismissed the frustrated murder and murder complaint, because we will actually argue that this might present a potentially absurd situation wherein the mastermind of the war on drugs, namely Mr. Rodrigo Duterte, is under the custody and being charged before the ICC for crimes against humanity for murder. And yet, ironically, low-level perpetrators who directly committed the murders are actually not being subjected to domestic accountability mechanisms. Now, let me relate this to the charge before the ICC against Mr. Duterte. He is actually charged for 3 counts of murder. Count 2, 3 counts of crimes against humanity for murder. Count 2 actually involves Oplan double barrel because it's the high value targets who were murdered under the war on drugs. And count 3 against Mr. Duterte actually involves those who were murdered under Oplan double barrel, specifically those who were murdered under Oplan Tokhang, which are actually from low-income communities. So you can see here that the war on drugs, the Oplan double barrel, CMC 16-2016, the EJ case that were committed under the war on drugs resulted into a charge before the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity of murder. And my take on this is that ultimately, if the domestic mechanisms of the Philippines were only working, such as judicial review before the Philippine Supreme Court, charges of murder and frustrated murder prospering before the Ombudsman, if this were only working in the Philippines for the victims of the war on drugs, the crimes against humanity for murder would have been prevented. But unfortunately, the domestic mechanisms in the Philippines did not really work effectively for the victims of the war on drugs. And there was also an erosion of respect for human rights and the rule of law in the Philippines. Hence, unfortunately, this is the reason why the crimes against humanity for murder in the war on drugs is now pending before the International Criminal Court against Mr. Rodrigo Duterte. Hence, the cautionary tale here is that domestic mechanisms of accountability should really work in order to prevent an international crime, such as the crimes against humanity for murder that were perpetrated in the Duterte war on drugs. I will end here and I will be open for any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. Thank you. You may proceed.
Thanks, Danielle, and
You're welcome.
I am honored to participate with the ABA today in this important discussion. An honor, as always, to work with Gilbert again. Sorry it is so late at night in the Philippines. And I'm pleased to join this discussion with Chantal of the ICC, albeit indirectly. Because of the time we're in, and as a person living under U.S. jurisdiction, in my case, a citizen, I'll just state for the record that nothing I say here is intended to provide material support to any of the sanctioned individuals who work at the ICC. I'll also mention I'm in The Hague right now attending the Assembly of States Parties meeting, which is the ICC's annual diplomatic governance assembly. And it is a weighty time to be here. But what's going on with the Philippines case is a bit of a bright spot. My organization, just a little bit about us, stopthedrugwar.org. We have been working since the 1990s on drug policy issues, advocating for non-punitive approaches. We've had a focus on the Philippine drug war since 2017, when we organized our first of what are now many events at UN meetings, that one, the Commission on Narcotic Drugs and other settings. So we hold, and this is not, I'm not trying to relate this especially to the current topic, but I'll just note for reference, we're an organization that believes drug regulation rather than prohibition would be a better route that causes less harms. One of the harms we see from the global prohibition system is that we think it guarantees there will be grave human rights abuses occurring in nations' drug wars. Not in every country, not at every time, but at times. So, for example, we have there are countries like Portugal that have a very thorough decriminalization system with thorough provision of the relevant health services that people need. But we also had Duterte's Philippines, killings still continuing at some level under President Marcos, at least 200 this year. And we have U.S.-style mass incarceration. So that's one thought about the basic system. Our title, A Cautionary Tale, perhaps relates to the possibility that other people who might be tempted to commit crimes against humanity will think twice, because even if they think they're safe, things change. Former President Duterte thought he was safe from capture, and he was not. We have a situation like this now in the United States, or from the United States, in which the U.S. military is also now engaging in extrajudicial drug war killings. 83 people are known to have been killed in these strikes on alleged drug boats, most of them off the coast of Venezuela. 21 boats blown up from the air without warning. So one caution we hope that will come from the Duterte case will be the discouragement of that. But there are other cautionary tales here, and they point in multiple directions. One of them is a tale of democratic backsliding in the U.S. and the world. Another related one is the degradation of human rights norms through the normalization and spread of extrajudicial killings. And the third is the risk that exists to the future of the ICC itself if its supporters, especially the most powerful ones in Europe, don't stand firmer and taller in support of the court. Caution, the risk of extrajudicial killings spreading, and I'll be limiting my remarks to extrajudicial killings in nations' drug wars. Domestically, I warned on our website and email list last February that there's a risk Trump could attempt a Duterte-style drug war here in the U.S. That is still speculation, but Trump is carrying out a Duterte-style drug war at sea. It has to be viewed as more likely today that he might try something like that inside the U.S. than it seemed a few months ago before the boat strike started. So the risk of EJK spread has a domestic component for us. And adding to the risk there are other warning signs. There's the January 6th pardons. There's the increasing aggressiveness and abusiveness by law enforcement in Trump's deportation campaign, the rapid hiring of new agents being done, I'd say not as rapidly as they'd like, but haphazard hiring, which is a dangerous way of doing things at any time. This is being fueled by the ICE expansion passed as part of the Republicans' federal budget. Yet another sign that the U.S. could be vulnerable to a Duterte-style killing campaign is the willingness by a significant segment of the political right to embrace the perpetrators of extrajudicial violence. Let me say before I go further, I am not claiming that this is solely an issue on the right. It has come up on the left, as we know, tragically in recent times. But it's particularly a problem on the right in the United States at this time. One example is a young man named Kyle Rittenhouse, who in 2020, during the height of the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter mass protests, traveled to, I think it was Minnesota or Wisconsin, with his weapons, started a fight with two protesters and killed them, got acquitted and was lionized on the right. Following the first boat strike, we saw already figures on the right willing, even eager to defend this. For example, two regular commentators on CNN who are Trump-aligned, Scott Jennings and Michael Singleton, argued, to the surprise of their fellow panelists, that it's justified as a way of protecting the nation from drugs. One of them acknowledged there could be a mistake. Well, he could have, Scott Jennings, he could have gone another step and acknowledged, well, if there could be a mistake, that's a reason for due process. And by the way, we don't have the death penalty for drugs. And by the way, the drugs the president is talking about, fentanyl, aren't trafficked from that area in the Caribbean. So far too eager to justify killing. And this has been seen in polling that's been done of public views that more than 50% of respondents on the Republican side support this. That does not necessarily mean, however, that they'd support it if filled in on all the details. So I'm not saying all hope should be lost from the right side of the aisle, but those numbers were there. Now, if Trump does attempt an extrajudicial killing campaign inside the U.S., a possible time, perhaps a logical time from his perspective, would be in the lead up to next year's congressional elections, or 2 years later in the lead up to the presidential election. If Trump loses power, well, he doesn't want to. He might fear the possibility of prosecutions resuming. A small number of these killings in Democratic stronghold neighborhoods in urban environments would jeopardize the nation's ability to hold a fair election, drive down turnout, or even provide a pretext for calling off the election or ignoring its results. Duterte-style drug lists could also be leveraged to discourage Trump's opponents from speaking out forcefully out of fear of being added to such lists. Again, I am not predicting that this will happen. I don't know how to assess the likelihood, but I think it has to be seen as more likely now than it may have seemed a few months ago, given what's happened. Cautionary tale internationally, whenever this happens in one place, it has a cost and increases risks in other places. The Philippines is only the largest extrajudicial drug war killing situation, which I define as a deliberate government action focused on drugs, now referring to problems of police violence that authorities, at least theoretically, are trying to stop. It's not the only case. In Thailand in 2006 is the first that I remember, in which the government under Thaksin Shinawatra killed 3,000 people. Following a couple months after Trump made a comment supportive of Duterte's drug war, then President Joko Widodo in Indonesia called for killings. He couched it slightly more carefully than Duterte, but only slightly. He said, "Kill them if they resist." That was in July 17. Another episode of them occurred in Bangladesh, over which the U.S. State Department in December 2021 actually imposed a Magnitsky sanctions. Two episodes taking the lives of hundreds of people. Issues in Brazil. Now we have the U.S. boat strikes in the Caribbean, and there have been further international consequences flowing from that. Responding to the first strike, the Prime Minister of nearby Trinidad and Tobago said that drug traffickers should be, quote, killed violently. Whether her country goes that route or not, a statement like that from a head of state affects the climate for human rights. The Trump killings may have played an encouraging role in the massacre of 121 people in a favela of Rio de Janeiro by Brazilian police, who claims, and I can't speak accurately or otherwise, that it was people were involved in drug trafficking, several times larger than any prior massacre by police in Brazil. So, next cautionary tale. This is the one we want, that that leaders who abuse human rights should look out and maybe shouldn't do it. Now, right now, it seems hard to imagine Trump or members of his administration facing justice, given what we've lived through the past several years. But statements like that are true until they're not. In the face of much dimmed popularity and as a lame duck, the president has already lost some of his control over his party. Following Washington Post reporting alleging a second strike on one of the boats to kill survivors of the first, there has finally been some bipartisan action in Congress on the matter. Reportedly, the admiral involved in the second strike will testify before one of the committees. If he implicates Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, President Trump, or even just himself, it'll be on the record, creating the possibility of future action. That would affect the president, that alone. Now, another possibility, and I would say a likelihood, is that victims or advocates will bring international jurisdiction cases, criminal cases, in favorable venues in other countries like Argentina's, or civil actions against persons whose names have come up as being involved in this. Yet another possibility is that the boat strikes could go before the ICC itself. Now, the U.S. is not a member of the Rome Treaty. Reportedly, all of these strikes have been in international waters. They say they have been. I think that's likely. But if any of the vessels were registered with a government that is a member, like Venezuela, where there's already an active investigation, or Colombia, where this has been reported, and whose president has called the boat strikes murders and called for international legal bodies to get involved. If registration is documented with either of those states or any other member state, the ICC will have jurisdiction. For the court to proceed with a case against Donald Trump and the others at this moment might be suicidal, but a state referral potentially might be kept secret for as long as it's needed for security reasons. An Article 15 communication from the general public would be confidential as a matter of course, and so it looks to me that Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, perhaps others, can never know for sure that this is not an ICC matter, or that someone won't have the authority in the future when they're no longer in power but reported as traveling outside the US, to have them arrested. I have no information to indicate that things are moving in that direction, but the Article 12 of the Rome Treaty lays out this jurisdictional path in its maritime provisions. One obstacle I will add is that the Maduro regime, a horrendous authoritarian regime, has itself suppressed the flow of information about the strikes, other than the fact that they oppose them. It's been useful to the regime to further intensify its repressive measures, which had ballooned to an even greater level than before, following their election loss, which they denied was a loss. And so there's very little information available about who was on the boats or what they were doing, except in one case. But that doesn't mean it won't come out later. In that one case, it was reported to have been a drug trafficking vessel, but cocaine, not fentanyl, and too small a boat to get anywhere near the United States. It probably was headed to Trinidad and Tobago. Next cautionary tale, there are risks to the court's future. It's unknown if the court will survive. These U.S. sanctions, we haven't talked much about, but the two deputy prosecutors who are leading the office of the prosecutor while the current chief prosecutor is on leave, being investigated over alleged sexual misconduct. Several of the judges have all been sanctioned. NGOs who've cooperated with the court on the case that prompted the sanctions, the Palestine case, are sanctioned. Extraordinarily difficult situation for them and their organizations. The European states have yet to implement the blocking statute they have available, an admittedly imperfect measure for encouraging businesses to continue providing sanctioned entities with needed services. The likely reason for the delay is they fear it will lead to even worse sanctions, or perhaps to worse measures. But those could happen. It's believed to be likely that the president at some point will impose sanctions on the ICC itself as an entity. Congress might do it. They tried unsuccessfully to enact sanctions, and I think it could get worse than that. There must be people in the White House who are aware of the ICC's potential jurisdiction over these savage crimes that they've committed. They may see it as in their future interests to destroy the court now while they're still in power. And, I'm sitting here in The Hague, in the Netherlands. There might be less difference in Donald Trump's mind than there would be in other people's minds between massing gunships in the Caribbean Sea off the coast of Venezuela than it would be to mass them in the North Sea off the coast of the Netherlands, walking distance from here. the Overton window of possibilities for bad things happening is wider than it's been in a long time. They could also come up with pretexts for inappropriately using sanctions-related criminal penalties that apply to U.S. persons for our involvement in ICC advocacy or against foreign nationals who do work with us. On the other hand, there's a glimmer even in this area. The Trump executive order had a change relative to the version that they attempted to pass in Congress, a change that appeared to exempt the Philippines case by stating that protected persons, under the definition used in these sanctions, would not include those with states that have accepted the ICC's jurisdiction, which, even though the Philippines is no longer a party, it accepted the jurisdiction, for the time that it was a member. Someone put that change in there. It likely would not protect the case in practice if the court as a whole gets sanctioned. It's not clear how much protection provides now, but maybe even in the White House, there's not a absolute disregard for anything that the ICC must do. But it's been rumored that the U.S. Is seeking changes to the Rome Treaty itself to limit its applicability to nationals of states parties, which would undo a lot of what's important. And if other states don't bow down to that, perhaps worse measures will be contemplated. The other most obvious threat to the court's future is that of state withdrawal. Previously, it was only Burundi which withdrew, and then the Philippines, both in response to prosecutions. Two other countries had started the process, but then broke it off. Now, Hungary has initiated the process. There's been no investigation there, but it's an authoritarian government that might view itself at risk. And three countries now, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, facing investigations or at risk of them, have announced they will be withdrawing. It's a definite blow to the court. So that is another cautionary tale that we're living. Finally, the final cautionary tale I will address is that of the larger democratic backsliding and how these situations play into that. I stated at the beginning of my remarks that we view the drugs as an issue that, under the global prohibition system, inevitably leads to major human rights abuses, not in every place and time, but at some places and times. In a larger sense, we see drugs as an issue figuring in the great problems we face in our time, in a way different but also similar to issues like immigration, sociocultural changes, economic changes, as an issue with the capacity to rapidly punch through democratic norms and laws. One way it can do so is by dividing the opposition to authoritarianism. The idea of fighting drugs brings along some people who might generally be aligned with the would-be authoritarian, but don't necessarily want authoritarianism, and who one might expect to at least object to the most extreme abuses. But like the CNN hosts, Singleton and Jennings, they don't object when it happens. The drug issue is one capable of dividing opposition by attracting people who are on the other side politically from the authoritarian, but who, instead of straightforwardly condemning any abuses, in some cases prefer to offer triangulated support for them. And so in the congressional opposition to what Trump is doing with regard to Venezuela, most of the legislation so far has dealt solely with the question of who gets to authorize war, Congress versus the president. There is a resolution now in the House that at least sounds like it's intended, I'm sure it's intended at least to stop the boat strikes. And some members of Congress, some senators have come out clearly against the boat strikes, characterized them as extrajudicial killings or murders. There's some who have not done so. There was a great video released by several senators calling on members of the military to informing them that they have the right to disregard illegal orders and that they are supposed to disregard illegal orders. They've been attacked by the president, who called for them to be hanged, then called for them to be just prosecuted. One of the senators, Alyssa Slotkin, actually said, the boat strikes are okay. It's the attack on Venezuela that wouldn't be. That may be a simple mistake. We should not assume it's anything other than that, but it shows, it demonstrates this problem, especially in situations like this one, where there is more than one issue. There's the extrajudicial killings, and there's the prospect of war against the Maduro regime, attempted military regime change. Complicated, even for us, and certainly for politicians. The divided opposition issue, it's these examples, they're similar in some ways to how some Democratic politicians, rather than straightforwardly coming out against this abuse, might prefer to give speeches about drugs and crime, not saying they're for killing people, but not dwelling on it. Think about Democratic politicians who, despite their party, like to talk about how trans athletes shouldn't be able to compete in sports of people with a different birth gender, or who attack protesters in whichever issue, or woke, quote unquote, vaguely defined. By doing this, they gain appreciation from within the authoritarians' fan base, but they are also from impressionable members of their own party's traditional base. And in that way, the opposition is divided. So lastly, on that topic, the support of no small number of Democrats in the House of Representatives for the sanctions against the ICC when votes were getting taken is a concrete legislative example. Despite living through attacks on the rule of law in the US system and its consequences, some Democrats have been all too willing to level analogous attacks on the world's only permanent rule of law tribunal if it dares to take on an ally. Well, they have an alternative. They don't have to agree with any particular case. They can say that. The government can, any interested party can engage the legal process at the ICC, and that might not achieve all of their objectives, but the alternative of politically corrupting the process at the International Criminal Court, or potentially destroying the court, ought to be seen as unacceptable. In conclusion, I will say that we need for the opposition leaders in our fight for democracy to hold the line, as Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Laureate from the Philippines, says. At this moment here in the US, that means being clear that murder is murder, whatever the stated purpose, whether it's an assassination of a political figure or a drone strike on an alleged drug boat. From there, it means figuring out what kind of evidence gathering we can do, if any, on our government's crimes to make prosecutions possible in the future, as brave Filipinos have done under Duterte. Because if these crimes go unanswered, that will be an injustice, but it will also compound the risk to our future, the future of democracy and human rights for us. And the bad feelings that come of this will resonate throughout the world for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. I'd like to take the time to thank all of the distinguished panelists, as well as Chantel Daniels, although she was here by video, her contribution was very much needed. And I'd like to also thank all of the audience and attendees for joining. And at this time, we will open up question and answer. And we actually do have one here from a Trevor Lawson. And Trevor, and I will extend this to both speakers, whichever would like to answer first. Trevor Lawson asks, can the discrepancy between Duterte's facing charges while direct perpetrators escape prosecution be due to corruption at the national, local level? Gilbert, if you'd like to lead us off.
Yes, short answer is yes, if we use that word corruption in its broader context, like domestic mechanisms not being operated in accordance with its original purpose. Let's say judicial review. It's supposed to have a check, judicial check on executive conduct. But that did not work out for the Philippine war on drugs because as of now, it's our challenge against the war on drugs. And CMC 16-2016 is still pending before the Philippine Supreme Court. It's been for the past 8 years. So I think on that broader context, and the cautionary tale here, if your democratic institutions such as an independent judiciary, respect for human rights, legislative checks and balances, if they're not working, and there's really a very intentional perpetrator of an international crime, then an international crime will most probably happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Gilbert. David, did you want to address? You're on mute, David.
No, I think Gilbert has made the important point.
Okay. Then I will follow up with one more question before we end today. And this question here will go to for you, David. What kind of impact do you see President Trump's pardon for former president of Honduras, for a major drug trafficking charge, will have on how people view the boat strikes, or for that matter, the case against Duterte?
Well, it should be seen as a sign of the president's defining hypocrisy, and people who are paying attention, who disapprove of the boat strikes, will see it that way. But people who reflexively support the president will find a reason not to see it that way, or will say it's not important. And then there are some people in between. So I think it'll have some impact on the discussion, but probably, unfortunately, will be a blip.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David, for your response to that question. I would like to again thank everyone for joining our webinar today. And I would also like everyone to stay tuned for the next webinar on December the 8th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on the ICJ Provisional Measures in Genocide Cases. People can register on the ABA ILS website. If people want to follow us, they can do so on LinkedIn as well. ABA, International Criminal Law Committee. I'd like again to thank everyone for attending today, and I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you so much.